Howdy, everyone. Welcome to Free Association, which is a series here on Unsafe Space where we talk to interesting people who can provide an important perspective on relevant political, cultural, or philosophical issues. Today, I'll be speaking with Limpidă. Limpidă is a 24-year-old detransitioned man who writes a Substack about his experiences with and thoughts on transgenderism. You can find his written work at strigoi.substack.com. That's STRIGOI. And you can find him on Twitter at AmericanDog98. Before we get started, please don't forget to support Unsafe Space by going to unsafespace.com. You can buy merch. You can support the show financially there with cryptocurrency or throw away fiat or whatever you want. You can share the content with a friend, or you can just make sure you're subscribed on your favorite platform. We are on YouTube, Utreon, Odyssey, Rumble, as well as wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. So be sure you're subscribed there. Thank you in advance for doing that. And now, here's my conversation with Limpidă. Well, Limpidă, welcome to Unsafe Space.
Thanks for having me.
Hopefully, during the course of our discussion, we'll get into some heady topics like dissociative identity disorder, postmodernism, feminism, autogranophilia, transgenderism, all that kind of fun stuff. But it's kind of a daunting list of complicated topics a little bit. So I thought maybe the best way to start would be for you to just tell us a little bit about your story, because I don't think people who were not in that era really understand what it was like to grow up, especially in the Tumblr world, and to kind of see to have some of the influences that you had, and then to see the effects on you. So why don't you just start with that? Like, where are you from? How were you? What was your family life like when you were young?
Sure. So I grew up in New York City. I grew up in Queens. I was super sheltered because city life is not exactly conducive to raising a child. So there's really only kind of two parents in cities like that. It's either you're like super liberal, you do whatever you want, you kind of roam around on your own, which has its own pitfalls because all kinds of stuff could happen, or your parents recognize that it's not the best kind of environment for a kid and try to protect you from all that. And my parents really fell into the second category. I didn't really go anywhere without them. I left New York when I was like 13. I went to Orthodox school pretty much my entire time there. So it was like an upper middle class kind of living. We started lower and then moved up as I got closer to 8th grade. I was autistic and didn't know it, so I was kind of on the bottom rung of male hierarchy where I was, and that transferred over to high school too. And I was kind of effeminate. I wasn't really that good at sports. I was really sensitive to all kinds of sensory things, social things, and really awkward. So it wasn't great. Got bullied a lot, etc. We moved to New England. I'd prefer not to say where, just because I still live there. But
Sure.
moved to an upper class suburb in New England, and I went to a public high school that was super ritzy. And while I was there, I didn't have many friends going into it. I didn't know anybody. It was new for me. And I in sophomore year of high school, I met this girl that would end up being my girlfriend for about 7 years or so. And she introduced me to Tumblr. I got into it at her behest. I sort of early on, I sort of split some of my time online between some, just random meme pages like Meme Base or I Can Has Cheeseburger or whatever, just because I was doing that already as a kid because I like funny cats and stuff. It was cute.
Sure. I remember
Um,
that site. I Can Has Cheeseburger. Yeah.
yeah, it was a really lighthearted kind of, and a couple of male friends of mine me to 4chan, and I split my time between, that kind of I Can Has Cheeseburger thing, 4chan, and then with this girlfriend of mine, Tumblr, and eventually, um, you know, Tumblr very early on was a super, feminist place, and I was becoming more aware of like social justicey type things, and I had already been fairly liberal. My family was fairly liberal. My mom had identified herself as a feminist for a while growing up, so I already had that kind of inclination. And there was all kinds of discussions in 2011 or so. 2012 was when I well, 2011 was when I got into high school. Um, and there were discussions about like the rape crisis on campus and like manspreading and mansplaining and that kind of thing. And at first, I thought some of that stuff was a little bit ridiculous, but I could see that it was really affecting some of the girls in my life, including my girlfriend. And I could also see how, you know, 4chaners and 4chan culture in general was pretty misogynistic, pretty not not nice to women, and I liked women. And I didn't really want to hurt women's feelings. Um, I tried to be like cognizant of that at all times, and so I get into the Tumblr stuff, and it gets more and more radical over time. So it moves from your garden variety like Jezebel, Mother Jones type feminism to like you know gender identity stuff, getting really postmodern with it, very what they call like successor ideology type stuff, leftism and postmodern stuff.
Can
Yeah.
we pause for a sec? Because this, I just want to be clear to people. This wasn't like, because I don't even know how many people really knew what Tumblr was like. I actually had a girlfriend at the time who was in her mid 20s and was on Tumblr, so I was exposed to it, and I saw that we're not talking about. You're not going to a website with like threads that say let's talk about this feminist topic. These are there's a lot of fandom around specific pop culture stuff, and that's where these conversations are happening. Is that correct?
Oh yes, absolutely. There were theoretical threads, and there still are, but it was more like just a little extra spice to justify whatever it was that you were railing about at the time. So it was a lot of conversation about like or anti-feminist tropes and like Doctor Who or in Sherlock or in video games and that kind of thing.
Okay, so they're responding. These are you would say, are they mostly teenagers in early 20s? Like, what's the demographic here on Tumblr?
Yeah, it was teenagers in early 20s. The way that I think about it looking back, and obviously I can't really tell with any degree of certainty, but it seemed like it was
Sure.
a lot of teenagers that were in the fandoms and a lot of grad students that were still in the fandoms but were in school too, and they were receiving this kind of ideological education, and they were sort of mute, and they were taking it wholesale, and even just like injecting it intravenously is already bad, but they were also mutating it through the pop culture filters and spreading it to a bunch of teens online.
So they were armed. So they're kind of like armed with these new tools, philosophical tools, which may be their own kinds of poison, and then they're trying to apply them sometimes clumsily to stuff like, I mean, some of the stuff you list in some of your writing is like kids shows like Voltron, uh like Steven Universe, which I've never heard of, The Amazing World of Gumball. But like they're not applying even to adult works sometimes.
Yeah, they're doing it to all kinds of things. There were adult works, but
Okay.
it skewed super young, a lot of the shows that they were watching. Like a lot of teen shows, like I'm trying to remember what was popular at the time for teens.
Well, there's a famous article about Glee as one of the shows that
Oh
this
yeah.
happened in. So yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
big Glee presence there. Not really my not really my like circle's cup of tea, but there were a few that liked it. There were people really into Supernatural. There were people really into Hamilton, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're in high school. I don't want to downplay it, but uh it's not wholly unheard of to have an awkward, slightly on the spectrum kid who doesn't fit in high school. Like that's and gets picked on. Like that does happen, right?
Yeah.
It's you're not alone, but you're that kind of a kid, which I think we all some of us experience directly a little bit, and some of us at least know people like that. So it's kind of a normal kid. You're drawn into spending time on Tumblr just because that's where your girlfriend is, and I assume that sexual access is part of the lure of keeping your girlfriend happy. She wants to be talking about stuff on Tumblr and have you there. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. That's part
Okay.
of it.
All right. All right. I'll stop with my tangent and let's get back to your story. So here you are on Tumblr. You've got the stuff, people talking about man spreading and they're problematizing things. Now what?
So now I'm there was a lot of built up issues from my time in New York. It really wasn't a great place to grow up, but I also felt like I wasn't really being challenged that much in school. I kind of got a lot of good grades without really having to do much work. I never really had to study or anything.
Mhm.
And coming up on junior year, I start, doing AP classes. And that's really when it starts to pick up. I have to study for the first time. I have to think about things proactively for the first time. And my first semester with these AP classes, I don't do well. I get like a C minus, C plus, which is normal. Which for the jump from normal high school classes to AP, that tends to happen to everybody,
Mhm.
and pretty much everybody in my class got below a B that first semester. And my parents did not like that at all. They were really furious with me that I didn't do well, and I tried to explain to them, listen, the difficulty curve is a lot higher. It's a lot more intense. There's a lot more reading. I haven't been in that before, and they accept it, but they tell me like, okay, you have to get an A. Like you do have to, by the end of this, you have to get an A. You have to have a good GPA, otherwise you're not going to get into school.
Right.
And you know, I do my best, but it's inconsistent, right? Because it is a higher difficulty level. There is more expected of me, and then I also got sports on top of that, and trying to pick a college, which I felt totally aimless about. I didn't really know. I wanted to go to one school in particular, but that was just because of the culture, really. I wanted to go to Bard College, but I didn't know like what I was gonna do with my life. I didn't, the future seemed very shaky. Because I was one of these people that was always looking at like what was going on in the news and whatnot. I was one of those kids where like everything coming out was just really debilitatingly or demoralizing. I guess it was super demoralizing because I was hearing like, okay, well, the income gap is growing, student debt's growing. It seems like
This
my
is post depression. This is post the recession of 2008 and 9 as well. So it wasn't a great economy to be looking at this stuff in either.
not at all, not at all.
Yeah.
And I felt like there was a pretty good chance that I was not going to secure the same level of comfort that my mom had achieved. And she got lucky during the recession too. She didn't get laid off. She got promoted because everyone around her got laid off. So, you know, I felt like that wasn't. gonna be me. Like, you know,
Right.
and I was really interested in history, and especially history. That was my main thing. And I knew that with history, there's not really many high-paying jobs involved with that. And at that point, I had kind of given up on trying to get a high-paying job, but there was still this hope that maybe I would somebody would like kick me into wanting to make some money. But I don't know. It didn't work out, and so it was that problem. And then puberty hit too, and that was a huge issue for me. I was not adjusting well to it at all. I was struggling to like recognize myself in the mirror. And I was really deeply uncomfortable with my body, just because of how I had been picked on before, and everything like that.
Right.
And then with this feminism stuff coming from Tumblr, and all this stuff about like, oh, men, the patriarchy does everything. Men are, scum, kill all men, men rape all the time, that kind of thing, and really not wanting to be involved in that at all. Um, and I blamed myself a lot for things that were not my fault, and I made mountains out of molehills, and kind of ignored any real problems that were going on in my life in favor of these sort of ideological specters, because they were how I
Mm.
were interpreting the world. It was causing a lot of strife in my personal relationships. I lost a lot of friends. I kind of only have a couple that still talk to me. Um, and I was spending a lot of time with this girlfriend of mine, like hours and
Yep.
hours. We were talking all the time. We were barely sleeping. We were talking so much, and we sort of borrowed aspects of our personalities from each other, and sort of lost ourselves within each other. And by the time I was 15, 16, started identifying as non-binary, because I was like, okay, well, this is my ticket out of being a patriarch. This is me fighting the patriarchy. This is me being an ally or whatever. The only
So,
way
hold on. Can we pause on that for just a minute?
Yeah, sure, sure,
Because that's
sure.
a leap. That's a leap, right? So I guess let's first talk about, you talked about there's a lot of feminism on Tumblr. And it sound from what you describe in your tumbling into transactivism article. I'm old. I printed it out. That's how old I am. But from what you describe in here, I'm not trying to put words into your mouth, but I do want you to elaborate on this a little bit. To me, as someone who wasn't immersed in this environment, it sounds like it's an incubator for female histrionics.
Very much so. It very much was. Yeah. Um, there are a lot of things in that article I described that I still can barely believe that happened. But it was a lot of girls that were trying to like um, build themselves up into something that they weren't. It was a lot of girls that had maybe experienced something bad, but they blew it the hell up, and then like interpreted what happened through these ideological lenses. Um, there were a lot of girls that were just like making stuff up in general, for attention. Um, and boys were doing that too on 4chan and on other sites. But I was already like primed to see, okay, well, this is bullshit. This is like, you're lying. This is like toxic as hell. This community is not exactly like uplifting and supportive. And the girls on Tumblr seemed to be more uplifting, seemed to be more supportive, but really they were just enabling each other. Um, and telling each other that, oh, you can do anything, and you'll be, no one can tell you any different. You can be yourself. You can define yourself however you want, and you don't have to take anything from anybody. And if somebody tells you that what you're doing is potentially bad for other people or bad for yourself, then they're just a toxic person. You should cut them out of your life, and that kind of thing. So it was a lot more
Yeah.
insidious, and I wasn't
I was
I
going to say
wasn't prepared for it.
male toxicity tends to be much more direct and in your face, and female toxicity tends to be much more subtle and insidious and manipulative.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've got, so this is happening, and I'm kind of curious, just based on what I know of other people. Did you grow up in an environment in which um you were held responsible for the emotional well-being of females around you?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I'd prefer not to go into detail about that because I don't want to.
That's fine.
Yeah, I have a good relationship with my family now, so I don't want to dwell on that too much publicly. But yeah, I
That's fine.
was in college
Okay,
that
so
really ramped up. So yeah.
all right, so you end up on Tumblr, and you get, when you're on 4chan, you can see the guys for what they are. Like, okay, this is toxic. You're a guy, you can see the toxicity. But you're on Tumblr, and the toxicity of it eludes you a little bit, and you already have a little bit of a white knight psychology, because you want to make sure you're more you. I assume you're uncomfortable with female upset at this point, and so you're wanting things to be, you're wanting to soothe people.
Very much so. Yeah.
Okay. So then you decide you're non-binary. Is this a decision that's like, gee, I don't really feel masculine? Or is this a decision that's like, if I attach this label, I'll show that I'm more of an ally? Or was there elements of both of that in there?
It was elements of both, but it was more of a personal thing. It was more of a I
Okay.
don't feel masculine, I feel more effeminate. And I was, my girlfriend was like giving me little gifts like flower crowns and my hair and stuff. And I liked that stuff, and I thought that that meant that inside of me some part was a girl. So
Right. Okay. And in retrospect, was your conception of masculinity at the time healthy, or was it different than what you now think masculinity is?
it was very unhealthy. It was very unhealthy. I didn't even really think about masculinity until I came into contact with the Tumblrized version of it. Um, so I just thought like men were men, women were women. I didn't think beyond that until I was told, well, everything men do is a sign of patriarchy and
Okay.
toxicity. So
All right. And obviously you identify with some stuff that you're like, okay, well, this is feminine, or maybe this isn't the most masculine thing. Therefore, maybe I'm really non-binary, which is kind of like, I don't know what I assume it's kind of like, I don't really know. I'm going to call myself non-binary. I'm in between. Is that
yeah, yeah.
okay?
I very much wanted to be in that in between. I floated through a couple different labels, so I just sort of collapsed it all under non-binary. I called myself gender fluid at one point, agender at another one, like just not having one. Um,
Right.
then I was a demi girl, which is I'm a girl most of the time, and then a boy sometimes. And then by the time I was 17, I think I was 17. I decided I was just a full blown woman, and didn't really dwell on it beyond that.
How did your girlfriend react to this as it was happening?
She was enthusiastic about it. She was enthusiastic about it because um, earlier in the relationship, before I had decided that I was a woman, she was living. She had socially transitioned in some parts of her life to live as a man. She had cut her hair. She had changed her name. She was wearing like all male clothes. She wore a chest binder, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, and she spent some time in a hospital because she was unwell. She had some issues with eating disorder. She was also autistic. She that kind of thing. And I think after about a year, maybe a year and a half, she gave that up, and she was like, "Well, I'm not non-binary. I think I'm just a lesbian." Right? But she didn't want to break up with me. So,
Okay. I don't want to break up with you, but I'm a lesbian. There's not a lot of options at that point, I guess.
yeah. And I was identifying as non-binary at that point. So she justified it to herself that way, and I justified it to myself that way. And so things kind of just kept going. But it's pretty clear to me now that she wasn't a lesbian. I can't say that with 100% certainty because obviously I can't get into everybody's head, but I mean, we were together 8 years, so you know.
Well, she's a lesbian who likes dick. Not to be crass, but like, I mean, I don't know.
Basically,
I've met someone like that, so it's okay. Who sounds actually similarly dysfunctional. So I just so from her perspective, though, when you talk about this in your Substack post, from the female perspective, so if your world is, if Tumblr is a big part of your social interaction and a big part of your world, if you're male, you are the subject of ridicule and derision and really not treated super well. But if you're anything else, you're pretty okay. And so for it, and or including I would assume trans man. So for her to transition from woman to trans man and then decide she's a woman again but a lesbian, she's not dealing with a lot of backlash for that in the community, I assume.
Yeah, she didn't really. There wasn't a whole lot of backlash for that. Whereas if I decided again that if I had desisted and decided I was a man again, it wouldn't have gone as well. But of course, the mental trap meant that I wasn't able to desist myself anyway. So
Right. Okay. So she says I'm a lesbian, and what's the impetus for you to decide I'm not non-binary anymore or asexual or gender fluid? I'm a woman.
I think it was a combination of things. One being that I had totally given up on masculinity altogether. I hated everything about it, and I had begun to believe that testosterone was actively killing me. Like I actually thought that it was, yeah. And that's because of some posts from the trans community talking about this. I mean, they didn't explain like specific symptoms or anything, but I was in a state of very high panic constantly, and you know, and a lot of that was because I would look down and I would see like I'm hairy, or I smell, or fat's in the wrong, or quote unquote wrong place, and of course I have male genitalia, and it felt strange to sort of think I was I didn't want to admit to myself I was a man, because so much of one of the only solid relationships that I had rested on the idea that I wasn't one. And so I sort of wanted to like purge all of that away. And not only that, but there were posts about like, oh, well, HRT is life-saving. And if you're suicidal, or if you're going through like this list of mental health symptoms that are just sort of, autism for the most part, then you're trans and you need to get these procedures done. So
okay, so you're 17 when you decide that you're a woman, roughly?
Yeah.
Okay, and did you start medical? Were there medical changes that associated? Did you go on hormone replacement therapy? Did you do anything right away?
Right away, no, but I begged my parents for it, and they were like, absolutely not, no.
Good for them. They may have saved you a little bit doing that, but okay.
for a little bit, yeah, for a little bit, but I basically sabotaged my college career, believing that I wasn't able to succeed because I wasn't on hormones.
Wow.
I didn't totally sabotage it. I still graduated and finished up and everything, and my GPA wasn't that bad. It was just below a 3, so not terrible, but it wasn't good.
Did you start treatment at some point though? When did you start?
I started the summer right after I graduated college, so 2019.
Okay, and how old were you at that? Just for context, is it like 21 roughly? 22?
Yeah.
21. Okay.
21.
All right. So you're 21 years old and you start, I assume the first thing you start is the easy thing, the hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's all I ever did was hormone
Okay.
replacement therapy.
All right. Well, that's good.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I started it at a time in my life when I was so in college. College is its whole other story. I started living with the cult at the time. I was in it was a Black Lives, so it started as a Bernie Sanders thing, and then he lost and it transitioned into something else. They call themselves college progressives, and it was basically a Black Lives Matter type thing. Mostly it was staffed by a lot of people of color, and it was run mostly by this one very charismatic woman, a very narcissistic woman, very manipulative, um, who wanted it to be this like far left anarcho socialist, whatever the hell. But at the center of its analysis was race, and everything else was sort of just ancillary to that. And I moved in, so I was in this orbit, and I was like preaching the good word in all my classes.
Are you
And
still with your girlfriend at this time? Just to be clear, are you still together?
yeah, we're still together. It was a long distance situation, and that made things worse too in its own ways. We were still talking every day for multiple hours a day. So that sort of conditioning remained. But of course, being in that cult, there was no incentive to be a white man at all because you couldn't say anything. No one would talk to you. So being a trans woman was fine. I mean, there were a couple straight white guys there, but they were like super deferential. But everyone was, because there was only like one or two people that were in charge of the whole thing. You really had to prove your worth constantly. There were all these kinds of ideological tests that were hidden in every conversation. There was one incident that I've recounted before, where this girl, she had just turned 21, so she she decided she was going to have like a couple shots in her room and then go out to the bars. And she lived with the leader of the cult, who was Muslim, and the leader of the cult was like, well, you can't drink alcohol in the common area. You can't leave any alcohol in the common area. And she agreed, and she said that was fine, but she left the shot glass in the sink and didn't wash it. And this cult leader freaked the hell out. She called a few of her most loyal foot soldiers over, and we basically yelled at this girl through her door until she evicted herself from the dorm
on her birthday.
The day after her birthday.
After her birthday.
Yeah.
So you're using the word cult. Is there a reason why you're using the word cult and not club or anything else? Like, are there aspects of this I'm missing?
So yeah, at the time that I transitioned, like right before I transitioned, I was called before a quote unquote restorative justice hearing over something that never actually happened. They said that I said something racist to a black member of the group, but they didn't tell me what it was, and they didn't tell me who I did it to. And they just sort of like, they gaslit me into believing that I had said something at some point, and that I just was making up that I don't remember what it was. And
Sadistic,
then,
but okay.
very. And then I found out the actual reason why the hearing was called, and it was because I was kind of a shitty roommate. I was leaving clothes on the top of the dryer. I wasn't like doing dishes. I wasn't cleaning the shower. Typical roommate stuff. I should have been doing that. I had run away from home though, so I was like, it was a bad time, and I had warned them it was going to be a bad time. I was smoking a lot of weed. I wasn't well mentally by any means. I should have probably been institutionalized, but I wasn't. I was afraid to do that. I didn't have money to do that. So they run off this list of like minor grievances, And then they tell me that they want to separate me from the rest of the house with a curtain. They put up a curtain over the back stairwell and told me that the top floors were mine and the bottom floor was for everybody else. At least for the summer, because most people left during the summer, but there were a couple people that wanted to stay and they didn't want to stay with me. And they told me, if you follow up with us and you keep us updated on how you're doing, then maybe eventually we can take the curtain away and we can talk things through. And I didn't have anywhere else to live. I didn't have money to move anywhere else. So I was like, okay, sure. And I trusted them too. I really trusted them. So they put up the curtain, and then a couple months after they put up the curtain is when I start taking hormones.
Oh, okay, interesting. So this really is a self-erasure. The hormone, I'm seeing the hormones is really a self-erasure attempt.
Yeah.
Maybe that's wrong, but okay.
No, big time. Yeah.
Okay. So how long were you on hormones for then? Is there a happy ending to this story?
Yeah. So I stopped taking hormones this January, actually. So it's a recent.
Congrats. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
And that was, you were on them for how long? How many years was that?
So from August 2019 to January 2022, about 2 years.
Okay. August 2019. Okay. All right. So you're on for a couple of years and you stopped in January and you no longer identify as a woman. What was the impetus? What happened?
Why did I detransition?
Yeah.
So in May of 2021, a little earlier than that. So like right after my birthday, I started to feel like, okay, well, I'm trans and I pass and, everything's kind of fine. But I felt like something was wrong and I couldn't really explain it. And I was beginning to have a lot of, I was starting to have a lot of really weird sort of emotional issues over fertility. I guess not that weird when you consider that I had sterilized myself, but like I was like, well, how can I be an actual woman if I can't like have kids? How can anyone love me if I can't do that? And I, like in my head I was like, well, I know that I need to do this, for my own health or whatever, for my mental health and whatever. But it doesn't really make sense because if I'm so upset about not being able to have kids, then why would I do this? And I was starting to get religious again too, because I was living with my grandparents and there were all kinds of icons everywhere, and my grandma goes to church a lot, and I'd started to fall back into the faith because I needed something to believe in after I had deprogrammed from the cult. And I started to question, like, why would God make me like this? Like, why would he make it so that I need to live on artificial hormones? How did trans people in the past live without these things,
Right.
And so I start doing some light research. I start going into the RD trans forums to see if there are any parallels there, and I scare the hell out of myself because there are many. And then in May of that year, I start reading the work of Dr. Anne Lawrence, who is transsexual, and she says that she did a lot of work with Ray Blanchard on AGP, Autogranophilia, and the homosexual transsexual divide. And I had heard of Autogranophilia before, lightly, but I sort of discounted it as an explanation for why I was trans because I don't fit the model. In a lot of different ways, I didn't really fit. There were some ways where I straddled the two, and there were other ways where it didn't really make sense to me at all. And then I came into contact.
Can you pause for a second and tell listeners what you mean? What is autogodophilia? I mean,
Okay, yeah.
I know what you're talking about, but I don't think it's a common household word.
True. So autogonophilia is the sexual fetish of wanting to be a woman in some way. And the way that so the original research was done in the 80s about the not the original, but when that term specifically was coined, it was in the 80s, and there really were only two pools of male transsexuals. There were the ones that were gay and very effeminate early on, and they transitioned in their late teens, early 20s, and that kind of thing. And then there were the autogynophiles who usually transition later in life, in midlife, usually 30s, 40s, 50s, and they were heterosexual before they transitioned. And the explanation was that the super effeminate ones are trying to fit into society better without, you know, because they're non-conforming and whatnot, and the other ones are doing it because they have intense sexual desire to become a woman and don't feel relief unless they take drastic measures to get there. Now, I don't really believe that model works. Personally, I don't think anybody should transition for any reason. But in the modern times, and since the 2010s, that model doesn't really fit anymore, because the age for everyone transitioning has just declined precipitously.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was a little bit effeminate growing up. I wasn't the most masculine kid out there, so I thought, well, I kind of fit HSTS a little bit because I'm also young and whatnot. But then there were other aspects of it, because especially when I started reading the testimonies in Anne Lawrence's book, Men Trapped in Men's Bodies, I realized, okay, this is what it is. But it's not the whole story, right? Because I didn't know that that was what was happening. It wasn't like, there are a lot of theories out there about what causes this to happen and whatnot. And for some people, it's porn. There is certainly a lot of that. There's a specific kind of porn called sissy hypno porn, which literally hypnotizes you and makes you think you're a woman. But I was never into anything like that. I was never that kind of, but looking back, it's pretty clear that my relationship was where a lot of this stuff started to form. And just a general sort of discomfort with being male made me really want to be a woman. At one point, I had mentioned, though, that, like, when I was a kid, I was first exposed to pornography in general at 9 years old, and my first instinct, very young, yeah, very young. My first instinct was to get into the same position as the woman. So that's not like years and years of porn exposure made me, instinctually want to do that. That was just something I did, and it turns out that that's more a symptom of autism than of, like, a paraphilic disorder necessarily. And now that I've detransitioned, I don't actually have any sort of problem with autogynophilia at all. And I'm glad it's passed. I don't really think about it, but it's sort of latent. It's sort of there latently in a lot of people with autism. You see it in some girls too.
Is it a desire to be a female, or is it a desire to not be male, and whatever's not male is good? I'm trying to separate. I'm trying to understand that a little bit more, because you said you weren't into the necessarily the what did you call it, the hypnosis stuff, like you weren't into that porn, so you weren't it wasn't a sexual thing for you, and it didn't, your description doesn't sound like it was particularly sexual.
There
Your
were
motivation.
sexual elements of it. I think
Okay.
I think I developed an interest in I think I developed the interest in becoming a woman because I didn't want to be male. Because originally in puberty, I was very interested in being with girls and whatnot. But then I had started to get a lot of like rape anxiety, like while having sex with my girlfriend or with other partners that I've had. Um, you know, thinking like even if it's a totally consensual thing and you ask each other over time, like a million times, like still at the end of it thinking like I've just raped this person, and that
Right.
was because of the conditioning and whatnot.
Of
So
course. Yeah.
so the desire to become a woman was, for me, it was more born out from not wanting to be male because I thought male sexuality was evil and something worth to being demonized and something I
Right.
couldn't come to grips with. So
Okay, that makes sense. And now, so it sounds like you had left the cult, but were still um, taking hormones and still identifying as a woman. What was the impetus for leaving the cult? Was there like a waking up period there, or was it just you just moved on and left college?
no, I was gonna stay there for another year. I was gonna stay in that house another year, but then I got a text saying you need to get out so that we can get another roommate. And I was like, okay. And
Oh, so you
I,
were kicked out, basically.
I was kicked out basically.
Okay.
I spent all my money on all the savings I had on a different place in the same city, and that situation devolved rapidly because I didn't vet my roommate enough, and she ended up bringing in a boyfriend without telling me, and he turned out to be a crazy dick. So um, I begged my grandparents to move in with them, and they let me come in. And
Okay, so
that's how
you're all right. So that makes sense. So now you're living with your grandparents. They're more religious, so you're looking at faith again, um, and you're reading Dr. Anne Lawrence, and you're reading detransition stories.
Mhm.
And what was going through your head? What was the you know there's got to be some trepidation. Like I imagine that when you've gone down a path um so severely, like so permanently, that there's got to be a lot of fear of deciding that it was the wrong choice. Um
Oh yeah, yeah. I went back and forth on it constantly. Like one week I was like I'm gonna detransition, the other week I was like I'm gonna stay transition, and back and forth, and trying to make a decision at the time was impossible, but I kept trying to force it. Um, and you know, it was I was more scared of feeling the effects of testosterone again than I
hmm,
was of anything else. Um, and so when it came to detransition, that was my biggest fear. But when it came to staying transitioned, I was worried about like, now that I know I'm a man, am I gonna act like am I gonna perform femininity the way that I was when I thought that I was a woman? And that mask started to slip, so I was sort of freaking out, and especially reminding myself that I was male and not actually a woman was really hard because everybody was referring to me like I was a woman, and I
right.
was you know navigating the world like that, and the dissonance was growing and growing and growing, and but at the same time I was still afraid, like I don't want to feel those feelings again. I don't want to end up like totally depressed and downtrodden and everything like that. I don't want to have like that overwhelming libido or that like aggression or assertiveness or that energy. I just don't want to deal with that. um and I was scared of going through puberty basically a third time. um
Right.
and what ended up happening was I just towards December I was starting to have like repeated breakdowns, just constantly. And I was in grad school I had started grad school, so and that was going well, but I had a lot of meltdowns. Some of it was PTSD over like I can't believe these doctors lied to me and everything, and some of it was just like what do I do? What do I do? Like I can't merge these two images of myself. And
Sure.
Then in January, I started smoking cigarettes again, which you're really not supposed to do on estrogen. And I had started like, I was doing like 1 a week, and then it was 2 a week, and then it was like 3 a day. And at that point, I was like, okay, well, I have to make a choice here. Do I quit estrogen or do I quit cigarettes? And I chose cigarettes. I chose to quit estrogen, rather.
Yeah, you chose to keep the cigarette.
Yeah.
I wouldn't often recommend smoking, but if that's the result, I'm all for it. It's a good idea. So, I mean, right off the top of my head, how much raping and pillaging have you done since January? Then, have you started any wars, or you have any bodies in the basement?
Oh,
Now that you're a
plenty.
man? Good.
I'm a Viking, essentially.
Welcome to the club. Welcome to the club. So, I know we're joking a little bit, but I want to get into this a little bit, because you said you realized that doctors had lied to you. What was the process? I mean, at this time you were in your early 20s. So you're legally, you can decide what to do, what you want to do. What's the process for, when does it start with a therapist? Does it start with a family doctor? Like, how do you decide, like, okay, I want to go on hormones? What was that process like, and how did the medical establishment treat this decision?
I showed up at a Planned Parenthood clinic. Well, I had made an appointment, so I waited like 2 months, only because they had like a massive volume of patients they were seeing. So I waited 2 months for an appointment. I got into the appointment. I sat there. I filled out a questionnaire. They asked me some questions about my mental health, my physical health. And at one point during the interview process, I told them, I'm really depressed. I feel, I'm really depressed. I'm really anxious. I feel like I can't go outside. I feel like this is really bad. I think hormones are really going to help me. And they say, well, that's a sign that you're really trans. So I'm there for 45 minutes total, and they prescribe both testosterone blockers and estrogen within
Wow.
45 minutes. Yeah.
45 minutes?
Yeah.
I've had to wait at my doctor's office longer than 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Damn.
It was
all right.
Quick. And then I waited 2 weeks for the prescription to fill, and that was it.
Wow. Okay. So not a lot of double checking, or like, hey, maybe you should talk to a therapist. None of that.
They gave me a list of therapists to contact, but I tried to contact them. I couldn't get into any of them because there were too many patients, or because they didn't take the insurance I was on.
Right.
And I didn't have the money to just, pay out of pocket for it. I did see a psychologist, and the only reason that I saw her was to see if I could get an autism diagnosis, because I had suspected that was the problem for some time, but I still hadn't connected that maybe this is why I had like gender issues too.
Right.
But I got the diagnosis, and that cost like $700 or something, and then I was flat broke, and I didn't see anybody for a while. And then I spent some time in a hospital around Christmas 2020, 2019, so Christmas 2019.
Oh, okay.
Then I was in an outpatient program for a bit. I was really unwell. I was like hallucinating, delusional, like actual episodes of psychosis.
Well, this is when you're on a hormone replacement therapy at this point, right? Because I think you said August 2019 is when you started.
Yeah, but I think I left that part out, where I was even prior to hormones, I was very unwell. It was because of the marijuana. I was having hallucinations and psychosis.
Okay.
Very, very severe episodes, and a lot of OCD tendencies too, like thinking the world's going to blow up if I don't do XYZ in a certain order. So.
Okay. So definitely the kind of thing that I think we would say, hey, maybe a therapist is the right route, and it could be you're in for a long haul.
Yeah.
All right. So
yeah,
go ahead.
So the other thing though, I had a therapist too, after, like during outpatient, after outpatient, I was doing trauma work with her. I was doing EMDR therapy, which is a kind of exposure therapy for PTSD, and she didn't question the gender thing, right? She said it was out of her understanding of what it was. Every therapist that I came into contact with, most of them weren't gender therapists. They were just normal therapists, but they affirmed, and all they could do was affirm.
Well, I mean, if they don't
They
affirm, they get
weren't
themselves in
really
trouble, I imagine. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So there
Okay.
were no brakes on that train.
And you don't have to talk about this if you don't want to, but was there an event that this PTSD, like, why were they treating you for PTSD? Like, was there a particular event, or they just were grasping at straws?
I had started reading a book called CPTSD, From Surviving to Thriving, by Pete Walker, and CPTSD is different from regular PTSD. The C stands for complex, and
Okay.
it's so normal PTSD is one big event, and you have to like recover from that. CPTSD is from many minor events over an extended period of time.
Okay.
And so I was seeing treatment both for some of the bullying that happened as a kid, and then also the abuse that I experienced while I was part of the cult.
Okay. That makes sense. So CPSD is a distinct thing. I hadn't heard of it. Okay. So now let's fast forward. You've in January you stopped hormone replacement therapy. Do you just stop, by the way, or is there like a separate regimen of drugs that help you get back to your normal hormone levels, or is it just a cold turkey, you just stop taking them?
I just stopped taking them.
Okay.
I tried
Okay.
to, they told me I should wean off of it, but they didn't tell me how. They didn't know how.
Okay.
They were just like, you just figure it out however you feel, that very like
Very
just sort of like,
scientific.
I'll wing it. Extremely,
Yeah.
extremely. I felt like I was in top level care there. But so I just cold turkeyed it. I just had to like Google really quick, like, is this gonna give me a stroke or something? And it turns out no. Plenty of people quit cold turkey and nothing happens to them. So I
Okay.
just quit cold turkey. Yeah.
So I want to get into something else, because on this channel, sometimes we talk about the relationship between bad philosophical ideas, which can be used as rationalizations for psychologically dysfunctional behavior, and psychological dysfunction itself and its role in the development and promulgation of bad philosophical ideas. There's kind of a feedback loop. They redound upon one another. And I've noticed, like, when you write about your Tumblr days and that whole experience, you've clearly spent some time studying philosophy. I think you're in grad school now, right? Can you tell us
Mhm.
what you major in? What are you doing in grad school now? And what was your motivation for whatever it is you're studying?
So I majored in sociology, and I'm currently in grad school for education. I'm trying to be a high school history teacher.
Okay.
Um, my my interest in what I studied was because I've always had this interest in history, and I I spent some time floating between a bunch of different academic departments and trying to figure out like, okay, which one attempts to develop a mechanistic explanation for the development of history. Because I could tell like, okay, these events are happening and blah blah blah, but I wanted to understand why they happened, and
Right.
sort of in a fit schema, I guess. And I ended up in the sociology department in part because of my own political influences and the influences of the department. They were very very woke, and I was very woke as well. Um, but I can't say I didn't learn something there because I did read a lot of the philosophy. I read a lot of stuff about prisons and about revolutions and how China's been developing and that kind of thing.
So
So
Foucault, Foucault and Derrida and that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
it sounds like okay. All right, so you in sociology, I guess you're learning some of the philosophy. Did you at the time relate it back to, oh, this is what I was seeing on Tumblr, or was it only like ex post facto that you looked back and said, wait a minute, they're applying some of these ideas. That's what was happening at the time.
It was I thought I was while I was reading these things, I knew that Tumblr was, part of it. But I thought that these ideas were good, is the
Right.
thing. Now I realize, is bad, but I thought that they were good. I thought they were useful critiques of what I saw as a very dysfunctional society, but they weren't, and they were really a political project for bringing those quote unquote critiques into reality. Just super totalitarian nonsense that comes from Foucault and Sartre and those types.
Definitely some Marcuse in there as well. So let's I guess when there's kind of a debate among it's a minor debate, but there's a debate among the people who complain about woke ideology, myself included, about whether it's more postmodernism or more critical theory. What did you see? Where would you fall on that debate in Tumblr? Like when you just looking at Tumblr, like, is this the application of postmodernism, or is this critical theory, critical gender theory, critical race theory, that kind of stuff?
I don't think the two can really be separated, if I'm being honest.
I think that's a great answer. Yeah.
Yeah. It's both. It's both. It's a lot of the whole oppressor oppressed dynamic, but it's also a lot of break down all the boundaries and everything can be critiqued, and even reality is fake and that kind of thing. So
yeah. So let's I don't want to keep you for too much longer, but I do want to talk about just a couple other things. First of all, your Substack is, I believe it translates, according to your about page, it translates to holding hands with ghosts. Can you tell people why that's the translation? What you mean by holding hands with ghosts?
So most of this whole transgender experience for me was enabled and really like came into existence because of my time online. And even when I was in this milieu, I was beginning to I had recognized like this is a very like these platforms are very powerful ideological enforcement mechanisms. And like I was floating around all these different ideologies and making connections with all these people that, even though they were very likely real people behind the keyboard, all I'm getting from them is avatars and text and images, and I'm not seeing anybody, and I'm not actually talking to them face to face, and I don't actually have a connection with them. It's just whatever they're projecting out at me, but not actually at me, but at a projection of me that I'm also projecting outward. And the ideologies that they hold are that way too, because they're kind of like skin suits, because some of these people they believe in ideologies that haven't had any sort of real world analog in a very long time. So I was in one particular episode, I was like super into the Spanish anarchists for a while. But there are no Spanish anarchists now. The CNT has been gone for decades. It's almost a century now, and so I chose the word strigoi, which I translate to ghosts. It's more than a ghost in Romanian folklore. Sometimes it's a zombie, sometimes it's a vampire, sometimes it's a restless spirit. But whether it's, the the zombie aspect is that it's a living corpse, right? It looks like it's a human, but it's not. It lacks those internal attributes that make it a human. It doesn't have a consciousness. The vampire, because it sucks all your attention and all your time and drains you of your life force. And then the ghost is just because everyone's hollow. There's no one flesh and blood to see or talk to. And all of my experiences with this transgender stuff, that's what it amounts to, is I am holding hands with these ghosts. I am talking to these people that aren't fully people. I am barely fully a human myself when I'm on here. And yeah.
I really like that metaphor, of just why I wanted you to describe it, because I think it's a beautiful metaphor, and it's poetic. So can you maybe tell people where you were so you've gone from being a trans woman communist, I believe, based on what I've read. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but trans woman, at least Marxist, communist, to where are you now? How would you describe your views?
I sort of wouldn't, I guess. It's hard.
Okay.
I still so I have hung on to Marx, but OG Marx. I don't tend to I don't do the Adorno stuff. I don't do the Marcuse stuff.
Okay.
There's some parts of Lenin, I guess, descriptions of the state and theories of revolution and whatnot that might be useful in a historical context. But I've stuck with Marx. I've stuck with not with the oppressor oppressed type dynamic, but with his explanation of capital overall, and his description of the political networks within capital have really helped me to see, um, you know, even just the cult that I was a part of, like understand its position within this larger structure as a microcosm of a microcosm of the academy.
Okay.
And how the academy is funded and who's funding this and who's funding that and that kind of thing. And but I don't believe in you know I don't believe in communism as a historical destiny or anything. I don't think that I'm a communist. um I fully cop to being a petit bourgeois manager as a teacher or as a student. So I have no place within that sort of, world historical struggle other than as an enemy of the working class. Um,
Sure.
so I don't, I don't necessarily take all that to heart. And I try not to. I try to stick to what I know to be real. Um, I, and that's iffy. I guess I'm sort of a liberal that wishes I weren't one. I'm not entirely sure. Um, I'm definitely anti woke though.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's in your position. Well, and in many people's position, I think it's completely reasonable to be a little bit lost, especially right now when the options being presented are all pretty horrible. And yeah, so you're rejecting the Frankfurt School stuff, going back to some OG Marx, but you're petit bourgeois, so I
Yeah,
don't
so
know,
who
on the wrong
cares?
side, I guess. Uh,
Yeah.
so okay. There's I forgot there's one more thing I want to talk about before I let you go. I'm sorry, I know it's been a while, but if you've got time, can I ask you about one other concept you brought up?
Absolutely.
Um, you talk about uh, you talk about dissociative identity disorder as acquired internet identity disorder, which I think is kind of a cool and funny way to describe it. Can you describe what you're talking about, where you saw it, and why this is how you view this disorder?
All right. So there was some discourse about it a couple months ago, and I wrote about it on Substack, which I'm assuming is where you pulled it from.
Yeah.
And so it came. So that particular wave of discourse about it came from videos that were popping up on TikTok of people in their teens and early 20s claiming to have multiple personalities and believing themselves to be like 30 different people at once, or shape shifting between all of them, and having a million gender identities or racial identities or various mental illnesses attached to them. And the first time I had actually come across that was also on Tumblr. That was also something that was very big on Tumblr, but you didn't see it in its raw form because Tumblr is a text platform and TikTok is not. So you really see the depths of the mental illness there. But the actual diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder in the DSM handbook, it doesn't appear the way that these people are portraying it. If it exists at all, which there's some debate about whether it does or not, it has to happen through like repeated and very severe child abuse that like takes place over the course of decade, like, and you have to have like severe isolation and things like that. You have to literally be like a POW as a child, essentially, for
Okay.
it to appear at all. And the theory is that the brain like splits its personalities so that only one part of it is experiencing any of the abuse and the core personality sort of remains intact. um and that's the
So you end
dissociative
up with
part.
like a Jekyll and Hyde then, where one personality is kind of relatively normal and the other one is dysfunctional in some way.
Allegedly, yeah, allegedly that's how it
Okay.
happens. And there are only like a couple cases where that is even plausible to be a thing, but the core difference between this and what is portrayed on TikTok and Tumblr is that the core personality is not aware of any other personalities. So like when
Hmm.
you shift between the different identities, like you don't actually know that it's happening. um and you aren't aware that you are anyone else but yourself. But the way that these people on TikTok do it, the way that these people on Tumblr do it, it's for attention. So they make a big show like, I'm a system, my pronouns are we, and I have, I know exactly how many personalities I have, and these are all their favorite colors and that kind of thing. So um
Yeah.
and I label it acquired acquired internet identity disorder because it spreads like a social contagion, just like transgenderism does. And there are actually a lot of parallels to it, in part because everybody that has DID also claims to have at least one trans identity. Um, and like for me, like I definitely for a while it felt like there were two different people battling it out in my brain. One of them totally constructed, obviously, but the other, but still felt very real because I was sort of inhabiting it for a while. And but I was aware of it, so I was aware of it. It was this artificial construct that I had made, this self-image, this sort of narcissistic projection, um, that I was trying to kill off, or was trying to kill off the other part of me, but couldn't because I wasn't really a woman. So, um,
Right.
yeah. Uh, so these other people that have the multiple personalities, like they make it their thing, like that's the thing that sets them apart from other people, and they're sucking up the information about it from other people who claim to have DID, the same way that I sucked up information about transgenderism from other people who claim transgenderism.
Right.
Um, and so I think the internet itself makes that, like all the social media platforms, they make that more likely because um, a lot of what I went through is synonymous with like narcissistic personality issues or borderline personality disorder. And um there are a lot of parallels there, and that does tend to come up a lot with people who have complex PTSD. And you see those sort of same trends with these people with DID. And, having been online for as long as I have, and knowing how it's affected my development as a teenager, like a lot of my more like cluster B-ish symptoms, like the borderline traits or the narcissistic traits, can be traced to how I interacted with other people online and how they interacted with me, the sort of mobbing and the bullying and the, and all of it just sort of taking place in this abstract realm of emotions without any sort of physical components to it at all. So it's very heightened, and it's very, and all these platforms are designed for engagement too. So the angrier you are, the more likely you are to stay on it, and that kind of thing. So I call it that because it sort of does encourage this splitting. You have different parts of yourself that you're mostly developing or spending a lot of time with online, and you're not able to really reconcile them into one single person because they're broken up into these different pages, and some of the communities are very toxic, and some of them are not, and you get a lot of validation for it. And the more validation you get for having multiple disorders, the more you're going to believe you actually have them. So, or
Right.
multiple personalities. I don't know what I just said there, but yeah.
No, I think it makes sense. I mean, we've talked on Unsafe Space before about the epidemic of cluster B traits that are pretty widespread. I think a lot of the internet, a lot of the tools that we use to interact on the internet actually reward a lot of cluster B behavior, which certainly probably doesn't help to heal people who have tendencies to behave in that way. It probably just helps them come into their own as a manifestation of whatever cluster B traits they've got. So
yeah,
I think it makes a lot of sense. Well, look, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I really encourage people to check out your Substack, which is Strigoi. Am I saying that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Strigoi, strigoi.substack.com, and read what you've got to say about this. And you can follow Limpidă. Am I saying that? I'm sorry. I want to say your name correctly,
You're
but
good,
it's Romanian,
yeah.
and I'm failing.
Limpidă.
Okay. At American Dog 98 is your Twitter handle. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, man. And congrats on your kind of emerging from, I think maybe a mental prison. And I hope that your journey from this point forward gets easier and more sane.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
I hope you enjoyed the interview. If you're a similarly aged male who went the other direction in response to the Tumblr nonsense, and by that I mean if you went the incel right-wing route, I would love to hear from you as well. So please reach out to us, and maybe we can share your story on this series as well. So thank you for watching this episode of Free Association. As always, thank you for supporting Unsafe Space. Until next time, take care. Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you're new to Unsafe Space, check out our deep content library that includes discussions with everyone from James Lindsay to Brett Weinstein. And please consider helping to fund our work by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on a variety of social media platforms, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space Discord server, which is open to financial supporters at any level. We hope to see you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production may be Russian propaganda. The following individuals are suspected of questioning one or more official narratives: Experts agree that there is an epidemic of sexually uninformed 5-year-olds, and Florida is the cause. Here's an idea: why not stop complaining and buy a Tesla? I'm sorry, there is no record of a COVID pandemic. You must be mistaken. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.